There is a piece of zinc sitting at any hardware store right now that costs a few dollars. When this metal touches iron or steel in the presence of moisture, it does something no spray can, no branded chemical, and no professional service on Earth can replicate. It sacrifices itself. Atom by atom, electron by electron, it gives up its own structure to shield the steel from ever corroding. The zinc rusts, so the iron does not. Not for weeks, not for months. For as long as the zinc remains in contact, the steel underneath is completely protected. The United States government documented this. NACE International, the world authority on corrosion engineering, confirmed it. The British Royal Navy proved it 200 years ago, and it has been quietly built into the most critical infrastructure on the planet, from the oil pipelines beneath your feet to the hot water heater in your basement, without anyone ever explaining to you how it works or how cheaply you can use it yourself. Instead, you were taught to buy spray cans that last a few weeks and cost $8 to $40 each. You were taught that rust requires professionals. You were taught that permanent solutions do not exist. And that story has cost the world more money than almost any other lie in industrial history. Rust costs the United States $276 billion every year. That figure comes directly from a landmark study commissioned by the Federal Highway Administration and conducted by NACE International, the world's most authoritative body on corrosion science. $276 billion. That equals 3.1% of the entire American gross domestic product. 3 cents out of every dollar this country produces goes to fighting a single chemical reaction. Globally, the World Corrosion Organization puts the figure at $2.5 trillion per year. That is larger than the entire gross domestic product of Brazil. Larger than Italy, spent annually, on rust. The United States Department of Defense alone spends $23 billion a year on corrosion, taking 16% of its military planes and ships out of service, according to the Government Accountability Office. And here is the fact that the rust prevention industry does not want you to hear. NACE's own published findings state that 25 to 30% of that cost, $70 to $80 billion per year in America alone, could be eliminated using prevention methods that already exist, already work, and cost a fraction of what people currently spend. Those are not my numbers. Those are the numbers of the organization that the rust industry pays to be members of. This is the story of the most powerful anti-corrosion metal on Earth, and why a $14.8 billion industry needs you to never learn how it works. Right now, at this very moment, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco employs a permanent team of 35 painters who work every single working day of the year. Their one job is painting the bridge. They never finish. When they reach one end, they turn around and start over from the other. The salt air, the fog, the moisture rolling in from the Pacific Ocean attacks the steel relentlessly. More than 600,000 rivets sit in each tower alone. Every one needs individual attention. Last year, over 2,500 gallons of paint were applied. An engineer named Henry Petrowski calculated that painting the Golden Gate Bridge has now cost more money than building it in the first place. The maintenance exceeds the construction cost. And this is the exact business model the entire rust prevention industry depends on. Recurring treatment, recurring purchase, recurring revenue, forever. But 202 years ago, a man proved that this entire model is unnecessary. And the story of what happened to his discovery is one of the most important and most deliberately buried chapters in the history of science. 1824. London, the Royal Society. Sir Humphry Davy, the president of the most prestigious scientific institution on Earth, presents 3 extraordinary papers. Davy was not an ordinary scientist. He had already isolated more chemical elements than any person in history, discovering sodium, potassium, calcium, barium, strontium, and magnesium through the revolutionary technique of electrolysis. He invented the safety lamp that saved thousands of lives in the coal mines of England and Wales. And his laboratory assistant was a young man named Michael Faraday, who would later become one of the greatest physicists who ever lived. The British Admiralty had given Davy a critical wartime problem. The copper sheeting on the hulls of Royal Navy warships was corroding in seawater. Copper hulls were absolutely essential. They prevented barnacles and marine organisms from attaching to the wood and slowing the ship down. A clean hull meant a fast ship. A fast ship meant the difference between winning and losing a naval battle. But the copper was dissolving, and the Navy needed a solution. Davy did what great scientists do. He experimented. He placed different metals together in saltwater solutions, measured the electrical currents between them, and documented everything. What he found was extraordinary. When he attached a small piece of zinc or iron to the copper hull, the zinc corroded instead. The copper was completely preserved, not slightly protected. Completely preserved. The zinc was sacrificing itself, giving up its own electrons to shield the more valuable metal. Davy had discovered the principle of cathodic protection, the foundational science behind all modern rust prevention. He proved that one metal can electrically shield another by acting as what he called a protector, what we now call a sacrificial anode. He documented it in 3 meticulous papers published by the Royal Society. He tested it on a real warship, HMS Samarang, attaching iron blocks to the copper hull, 2 at the bow, 2 at the stern. The corrosion stopped dead. The copper was saved. And then the British Navy buried it. The sacrificial anodes protected the copper so completely that the copper stopped releasing copper ions into the water. Without those toxic ions, marine organisms began growing on the hull. The ships got slower. The Admiralty decided that a corroding fast ship was better than a clean, slow one. They ordered the protectors removed. Humphry Davy's discovery, the single most important breakthrough in the history of corrosion science, was deliberately shelved by the organization that funded it. Not because the science failed, but because it succeeded too well for the wrong audience. Davy died 5 years later, in 1829, at the age of 50. His cathodic protection technology sat unused for over a century. It took until the 1920s for American engineers to rediscover it and apply it to underground oil and gas pipelines. By the 1930s, cathodic protection was standard practice in the petroleum industry, silently protecting billions of dollars of infrastructure that you drive over and walk past every single day without knowing it. But here is where the story gets personal. Because the same science is almost certainly operating inside your house right now, and no one has ever told you about it. Inside your hot water heater is a metal rod, usually magnesium or aluminum zinc alloy, called a sacrificial anode rod. It hangs inside the steel tank, submerged in water. Its entire purpose is to corrode instead of the tank walls. It sacrifices itself, atom by atom, exactly the way Davy's zinc blocks sacrificed themselves on HMS Samarang. That rod costs about $20 to $50. It extends the life of a water heater that costs anywhere from $500 to $1,500 installed. Plumbers know about this rod. They are trained on it. And most of them will never tell you about it. Because when the anode rod is consumed and the tank starts rusting from the inside out, the plumber gets to sell you a new water heater. A $20 rod, replaced every 3 to 5 years, can double the life of the appliance. Or you can skip it and pay $1,500 for a new one. The information you are hearing right now is worth thousands of dollars over the life of your home. And the plumbing industry profits from you not having it. And Humphry Davy's discovery became even more powerful when a French scientist named Stanislas Sorel took it one step further. In 1836, Sorel patented the process of hot dip galvanizing, coating iron and steel by dipping them into a bath of molten zinc at 860 degrees Fahrenheit. He named the process galvanizing after the Italian physicist Luigi Galvani, who had discovered electrical current between dissimilar metals in 1780 using a frog's leg and 2 different metals. By 1850, British industry alone was consuming 10,000 tons of zinc per year to protect iron. Today, North America uses over 600,000 tons of zinc annually for galvanization. The earliest known example of galvanized iron is an Indian armor piece from the 1680s, now housed in the Royal Armouries Museum in the United Kingdom. Every galvanized nail you have ever hammered, every galvanized fence post, every galvanized roof panel, every galvanized highway guardrail is Humphry Davy's science made permanent. And here is a fact most people do not know. Since 1982, every United States penny has been 97.5% zinc with a thin copper coating. The white stripe on a lifeguard's nose is zinc oxide. Diaper rash cream contains zinc oxide. 20% of the rubber in your car tires is zinc oxide, added for strength and heat dissipation. Zinc is everywhere. It protects your money. It protects your baby's skin. It protects your car. It has been protecting steel for nearly 200 years. And the methods that use it cost almost nothing compared to what the rust industry charges you. But Humphry Davy was not even close to the first human to understand how to fight rust permanently. 5,000 miles away, and 14 centuries earlier, something was happening in India that makes Davy's work look like a footnote. In the courtyard of the Qutub Minar complex in New Delhi stands an iron pillar that is 7.21 meters tall and weighs over 6,000 kilograms. It was forged during the reign of Chandragupta II, around 400 AD, during what historians call the Golden Age of India. The pillar has stood in the open air for over 1,600 years, through monsoons, extreme heat, brutal humidity, and the pollution of a modern megacity with 20 million people. And it has not rusted. At all. Scientists began studying the pillar in 1912. British chemists confirmed it was wrought iron, but could not explain why it defied the most basic law of iron chemistry. It took 91 years of investigation. In 2003, researcher R. Balasubramaniam at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur, after nearly a decade of self-funded research, published his findings in the journal Current Science. The ancient Indian blacksmiths had used iron ore with unusually high phosphorus content, about 1%, far above the 0.05% typical in modern blast furnace iron. They smelted it using charcoal from specific high phosphorus trees like Cassia auriculata. Critically, they did not add lime to the furnace, which modern smelting requires. They forge-welded the pieces by heating and hammering on a charcoal bed, preserving the phosphorus distribution. Over centuries of atmospheric exposure, the phosphorus migrated to the surface and catalyzed the formation of a compound called iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate. The scientists named this protective layer Missa White. It is 1/20th of a millimeter thick, 1/5 the width of a human hair, and it has shielded 6 tons of iron from one of the most corrosive climates on Earth for 16 centuries without a single coat of paint. The layer is self-healing. When damaged, the phosphorus generates new Missa White to seal the gap. The pillar grows its own armor. Balasubramaniam concluded that the blacksmiths deliberately chose high phosphorus ore and specific smelting techniques. This was not a happy accident. It was precision engineering, 1,600 years before the invention of stainless steel. Now, here is where the Delhi iron pillar, Humphry Davy, and your garage all connect. The chemistry behind the pillar's natural protection is available at any hardware store right now for under $10. Phosphoric acid, when it contacts iron oxide, the chemical name for rust, converts the rust into iron phosphate. This is exactly what happens naturally on the Delhi iron pillar. Iron phosphate is stable, inert, and bonds tightly to the metal surface. The rust transforms from a destructive, expanding corrosion into a permanent protective barrier. The United States Navy has used phosphoric acid treatments on ships and equipment for decades. The commercial product naval jelly is phosphoric acid in gel form. It costs between $4 and $8. The generic version OASPHO costs even less. Coca-Cola contains enough phosphoric acid that soaking a rusted bolt in it overnight will loosen the corrosion. That is not a folktale. That is published food chemistry. But phosphoric acid is not even the oldest rust-converting chemistry known to humans. That title belongs to tannic acid, a compound found naturally in oak bark, tea leaves, and chestnut husks. When tannic acid contacts iron oxide, it converts it into ferric tannate, a blue-black stable compound that bonds permanently to the metal. This reaction was not discovered in a laboratory. It was discovered through ink. Iron gall ink, made from oak gall tannins mixed with iron sulfate, was the standard writing ink in Europe for 1,400 years, from the 5th century to the 19th century. Every major document written in Western civilization during that span used this chemistry. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, Isaac Newton's personal manuscripts, Johann Sebastian Bach's musical compositions, the United States Declaration of Independence, and the Magna Carta. All were preserved by the exact same chemical bond between tannin and iron that converts rust into a stable, protective surface. A bag of tannic acid powder costs under $10 and can treat every rusted tool in your garage. And then there is the method that costs nothing at all: electrolysis. You need a plastic bucket, water, 1/3 cup of washing soda, a piece of scrap rebar, wire, and a manual battery charger. Attach the positive clamp to the rebar and the negative clamp to the rusty object. Submerge both. Turn on the charger at about 10 amps. The electrical current forces oxygen atoms to leave the iron oxide and migrate to the rebar. The rebar collects the rust. The original object gets clean. Within 6 to 24 hours, bare, clean metal appears. And here is the critical detail. Electrolysis is self-regulating. Once the rust is gone, the reaction stops. It cannot damage the underlying metal. It does not etch, pit, or weaken the iron. People have restored antique tools, cast iron skillets, engine blocks, military equipment, entire car frames, and a Spanish cannon recovered from the ocean floor off Florida using nothing but a bucket, soapy water, and a battery charger. Now let me show you the most dramatic proof of what happens when this science is ignored. The Statue of Liberty. When Gustav Eiffel designed the statue's internal skeleton in the 1880s, he used over a mile of puddled iron bars to support 80 tons of copper skin. Eiffel knew that iron and copper in the presence of moisture create galvanic corrosion, the exact reaction Davy had documented 60 years earlier. Copper sits higher than iron on the galvanic series, meaning iron sacrifices itself to protect copper, the opposite of what you want in a building. The Americans installed an insulating layer of shellacked asbestos between the iron and copper. It worked for about 60 years. Then the shellac dried, the asbestos became porous, and salt air from New York Harbor soaked through. A galvanic cell formed. The iron skeleton began corroding from the inside at an accelerated rate. The rust expanded. It swelled. It pulled 600 of the 1,500 copper saddle connections apart from the inside. The statue was approaching structural collapse. The 1986 restoration cost $87 million and required replacing the entire iron framework with stainless steel coated in Teflon. The National Institute of Standards and Technology led the investigation. Had the original builders used zinc isolation barriers or sacrificial zinc anodes, the same principle Davy proved on HMS Samarang, that $87 million disaster might never have happened. Now, here is the honest part that no other channel in this space will give you, and this matters more than anything else in this video. These methods have real limitations, and you need to know them before you start. Zinc sacrificial anodes require an electrolyte to function. That means they work in water, moist soil, or concrete, which is exactly why they protect ship hulls, underground pipelines, water heaters, and rebar inside buildings. Simply bolting a piece of zinc to a dry steel surface in your garage will not provide meaningful cathodic protection. Air is a poor ionic conductor. For dry environments, you need galvanization, which is zinc applied directly as a coating. Or you need chemical conversion methods like phosphoric acid or tannic acid. Those acids convert existing surface rust. They do not rebuild metal that has rusted completely through. If you can push a screwdriver through it, no acid on Earth will help. You need cutting and welding at that point. Electrolysis requires full submersion, which limits it to objects that fit in a tank. Always wear gloves and eye protection when handling phosphoric acid. Electrolysis produces small amounts of hydrogen gas at the cathode, and hydrogen is flammable, so work outdoors or in a well-ventilated space and keep sparks and open flames away. These are not reasons to avoid these methods. They are reasons to use them correctly. For surface rust on tools, car parts, bolts, or household metal, mix 1 part 85% phosphoric acid into 4 parts water to make a roughly 20% solution. Apply with a brush or a spray bottle and let it sit 30 to 60 minutes. Watch the rust darken as it converts to iron phosphate. Wipe clean. The surface is now ready for paint or protective oil. A $6 bottle of phosphoric acid makes gallons of working solution. For tannic acid, dissolve 10 grams of powder in 100 milliliters of water with a small splash of ethanol as a wetting agent. Brush it onto the rusted surface. Watch the orange rust turn blue-black within minutes as it converts to ferric tannate. Let it cure for 24 hours. Paint directly over it. For complete rust removal, set up an electrolysis tank. Use 5 gallons of water, 1/3 cup of washing soda, a piece of rebar as the sacrificial anode, and a manual battery charger set to 10 amps. Connect positive to the rebar and negative to the rusty object. Submerge both completely. Run it for 6 to 24 hours, depending on the severity. Scrub with a brass brush afterward. Dry immediately with compressed air or towels, and apply a protective oil or wax to prevent flash rusting. For long-term prevention, check the anode rod in your water heater every 3 to 5 years. If it is heavily corroded or more than half consumed, replace it. The rod costs $20 to $50 at any hardware store and takes 30 minutes to swap with a socket wrench. That one replacement can extend the life of a $500 to $1,500 water heater by years. That is the single most valuable piece of home maintenance information most homeowners will never hear from their plumber. The knowledge did not disappear because it failed. Humphry Davy proved cathodic protection in 1824. Indian blacksmiths mastered phosphorus-based corrosion resistance over 1600 years ago. Galvanization was patented in 1836. Tannic acid chemistry was documented in ancient Rome by Pliny the Elder in the 1st century. Electrolysis has been understood since Volta built his battery in 1800. Every single one of these solutions is older than the modern rust prevention industry by decades or centuries. They were not replaced because better options came along. They were buried under an avalanche of branded spray cans that cost 10 times more and protect for 1/10 as long. A $20 zinc anode that lasts 5 years cannot generate recurring revenue. A $5 bottle of phosphoric acid that makes gallons of permanent rust converter cannot sustain quarterly earnings. A free electrolysis setup that restores metal to factory condition cannot justify a $200 professional service call. The entire $14.8 billion rust prevention industry depends on one belief. The belief that permanent, affordable solutions do not exist. They do. Your grandfather knew that a galvanized nail never rusted. Your grandmother knew that a cast iron pan seasoned with Tannic black tea never corroded. They knew that the zinc wash tub outlasted everything made of bare steel. They knew that a battery charger and a bucket could bring a rusted tool back from the dead. For generations, this was kitchen table knowledge, passed down at zero cost. Then 2 generations of advertising convinced an entire civilization that only branded chemistry from a spray can could solve a problem that a hardware store trip handles permanently. What if I told you that there is actually a way to kill all mold with just a copper wire? You don't believe me? Watch this video to get your answer.